Have you ever ignored a knock at your front door, only to wonder whether that decision saved your life? Tonight, I'm going to tell you a true story about a man who pretended to be a delivery driver, but he wasn't delivering packages. He was choosing his next victim. I was living alone in a small rental house just outside of town. It was a quiet neighborhood, just 5 houses on a short dead-end road. Most nights the silence was almost comforting. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, so I rarely had visitors. Friends always texted before coming over. No one ever showed up unexpectedly. That's why the first knock felt so strange. It was Thursday night around 8:45. I was sitting in my living room watching television, when suddenly, knock, knock, knock. 4 firm knocks, not loud, not frantic, just confident. I muted the television and listened. Nothing. Then 2 more knocks. Someone was definitely outside. I walked slowly toward the front door. My heart wasn't racing. Not yet. I simply assumed it was a delivery. I looked through the peephole. There he was. A man standing quietly on my porch. He carried a medium-sized cardboard box. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He looked completely normal, mid-30s average height, nothing unusual. I unlocked the door but left the security chain attached. The moment I cracked it open, he smiled politely. Then he said, "Menirukkan suara pria dengan nada. I have a delivery that requires your signature. Jida 1 Detik." He looked down at a small handheld scanner and read the recipient's name. It wasn't my name. Not even close. I told him he had the wrong address. He frowned, looked at the box, looked at the scanner, then looked directly into my eyes. He slowly read the address aloud. It was my exact address. I explained that nobody by that name had ever lived there. He stared at me a little longer than felt normal, long enough to make me uncomfortable. Finally, he nodded. He apologized, said he must have received the wrong information. Then he turned and walked away. I watched him all the way down my driveway, expecting to see a delivery van, or at least a parked car. There wasn't one. No truck, no van, no vehicle, anywhere. He simply walked past my mailbox, turned the corner and disappeared into the darkness. I locked the door, double-checked the deadbolt, then I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he worked for a small courier company. Maybe his vehicle was parked farther away. But the following night, at almost the exact same time, there came another knock. Knock, 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 knock. The second night he returned, almost the exact same time, 8:45. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I didn't rush to the door. Instead, I quietly walked to the peephole and looked outside. It was him, the same man, the same dark jacket, the same baseball cap, and the very same cardboard box. Something didn't feel right anymore. Without opening the door, I spoke through it. "You were here yesterday. No one with that name lives here." He didn't answer. Not immediately. Then, his voice came through the door. Calm. Almost emotionless. "I just need your signature. The system says this package must be delivered tonight." A chill ran through my body. I told him I wasn't signing for someone I didn't know. Silence. Complete silence. For several long seconds, neither of us said a single word. Then, very quietly, he replied, "Okay." I expected him to leave, but he didn't. Suara semakin mysterious. I kept watching through the peephole. He slowly stepped backward until he reached the edge of my porch. Then, Instead of walking away, he simply stood there, watching. His head slowly turned toward my front windows, then toward the side of my house, then back to my front door. It wasn't the way a delivery driver looks at a house. It was the way someone studies a target. For nearly 15 seconds, he never moved, never knocked again, never spoke. He only looked. Finally, he walked away, slowly, without looking back. Again, there was no truck, no delivery van, no vehicle anywhere on the street. That's when the feeling changed. This wasn't a delivery mistake anymore. Something was terribly wrong. The third night, nothing happened. No knocking, no strange visitor, nothing. I actually smiled. Maybe he had finally realized the mistake. I even laughed to myself, thinking how strange those first 2 nights had been. But the relief didn't last long. On the 4th night, just after 9 o'clock, I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Then, without warning, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time it wasn't coming from the front door. It came from the side of the house, right beside the dining room window. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. I slowly walked toward the dining room, barely breathing. I looked outside. Nothing. Nothing. No one. Then suddenly knock, knock, knock. The front door. Jada Wanditik. I hurried to the peephole. It was him. But this time he wasn't holding the cardboard box. His hands were empty. I didn't say a word. Neither did he. Then he knocked again, slowly, deliberately. Knock, knock, knock. And then he stepped backward, lifted his head, and stared directly at the peephole. It felt as if he knew I was standing there, watching him, watching me. I quietly stepped away from the door, careful not to make a single sound. Nearly 30 seconds passed. Then he finally turned and walked away. I waited 5 full minutes before looking outside. Every light inside the house remained off. I carefully peeked through the blinds. My heart almost stopped. He was still there, standing across the street, near the tree line, perfectly still, facing my house. He didn't move, he didn't wave, he didn't speak. He simply stood there, watching. After nearly a minute, he slowly disappeared into the darkness. That night, I checked every single window, every lock, every door, twice. Because deep down, I already knew this man wasn't trying to deliver anything. The next morning, I called the local police on their non-emergency line and explained everything that had happened over the past 4 nights. The officer listened carefully before saying something that made my stomach drop. He told me it sounded like someone was trying to verify whether the house was occupied. Sometimes, burglars knock on doors to see if anyone answers before returning later to break in. He advised me to install security cameras if I could, and if the man ever came back, to call 911 immediately. I thanked him, but even after hanging up, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching my house for days. That evening, I decided to change my routine. I left every light at the front of the house turned off, closed all the curtains, and stayed quietly inside my bedroom. I didn't want anyone outside to know I was home. Around 8:45, right on schedule, the knocking returned. 4 slow, deliberate knocks. I didn't move. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, another 4 knocks echoed through the house. Then, silence. I stayed perfectly still. Almost a full minute passed before another sound reached my ears. A soft, dull thud from the back of the house. Then another. My heart immediately started racing. Someone was behind my house. I slowly picked up my phone, trying not to make the slightest sound. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard it. The back door knob slowly turning, then stopping, then turning again. Whoever was outside was testing the lock. Without wasting another second, I dialed 911. Keeping my voice barely above a whisper, I told the dispatcher someone was trying to get into my house. She calmly assured me that officers were already on their way and told me to stay hidden. While I remained on the phone, the knocking started again. This time, at the front door. Someone was standing there while another person was trying the back entrance. I realized there was more than one of them. The doorknob turned again. Then I heard something metallic lightly scraping against the doorframe. It sounded like someone using a pry tool. Every second felt endless. I could barely breathe. Then, without warning, everything stopped. No knocking, no footsteps, nothing. The silence was somehow even more terrifying. I stayed exactly where I was, phone still pressed against my ear, until flashing police lights finally illuminated the front windows. When the officers searched outside, they discovered fresh pry marks on the back door, right beside the handle. One officer looked at me and quietly said, "If you hadn't been home tonight, there's a good chance they would have forced this door open." His words stayed with me. Police searched the surrounding neighborhood, but whoever had been outside was already gone. The following evening, I decided I wasn't taking any chances. I packed a small overnight bag and drove across town to stay at my brother's apartment. I didn't post anything online. I didn't tell anyone outside my family. As far as anyone knew, I was still home. Around 9 o'clock that night, my phone rang. It was my neighbor who lived 2 houses away. Her voice sounded nervous. She asked, "Are you home?" I told her I wasn't. There was a long pause. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "There's a man standing on your porch. He's been knocking for at least 5 minutes." I immediately asked the question that had been haunting me all week. "Do you see a vehicle?" She looked outside again, then answered, "No, of course not." I told her to call the police immediately. Officers arrived within minutes and questioned the man. Later that night, one of the officers called me. The man claimed he had been trying to deliver a package, but somehow he had misplaced it. He couldn't provide company identification. He wasn't wearing any official uniform. And just like every other night, he had no delivery vehicle. The officers warned him to stay away from my property. For the first time in days, I thought maybe it was finally over. I couldn't have been more wrong. To be continued. 2 days later, the police finally caught him. Not at my house, but in a nearby neighborhood. He had been caught attempting to break into another home while the owners were away. When officers searched his car, they found something that immediately connected him to everything that had happened at my house. Inside the vehicle, there were several empty cardboard boxes. Boxes identical to the one he had been carrying every night. There was also a handheld scanner. At first glance, it looked exactly like the kind delivery drivers use every day, but it wasn't connected to any real delivery company. It was fake. Everything about him had been an act. During questioning, he finally confessed. He admitted that he always approached potential victims pretending to deliver a package. If someone answered the door, he would apologize, leave quietly, and mark the house as occupied. But if no one answered, especially after several visits, he assumed the property was empty. Then he would come back later, not with a package, but with burglary tools. He even admitted that he often returned several nights in a row, just to study people's routines. If the lights were on one night and off the next, he believed the homeowners had left. That was the signal he had been waiting for. Hearing that confession sent chills through my entire body. I realized just how close I had come to becoming another victim. If I had ignored the door during those first few nights, he probably would have marked my house as empty. And sooner or later, he would have forced his way inside. 3 months later, when my lease finally ended, I moved out. I didn't hesitate. I didn't even consider staying. Some memories are too difficult to leave behind. Even today, years later, I still refuse to answer the door after dark, unless I know exactly who's coming. Friends text first, family calls ahead, anyone else can wait. The first thing I do now is check my security cameras. If I don't recognize the person outside, I simply stay quiet, because I learned something I'll never forget. Not every delivery driver is delivering a package. Sometimes they're delivering fear, and sometimes they're only there to find out whether anyone is home. If someone ever shows up at your door holding a package with your address but someone else's name, don't assume it's just an innocent mistake. Lock the door, stay inside, call the company or the police, because the person standing outside might not be looking for a signature. They might be looking for an opportunity. And by the time you realize the truth, they may already know everything they came to learn, including whether you're alone or whether you're the next house they'll come back to. The knock itself was never the frightening part. The terrifying part was understanding what it really meant. And every now and then, late at night, when the neighborhood falls completely silent, I still catch myself freezing whenever I hear a knock at the door, because some sounds never stop haunting you, even long after the person making them is gone. The knocks that came before Christmas. It all began just a few days before Christmas. At the time I was living near Glasgow, Scotland with my parents, my brother, my sister, our cats and our dogs. We were a close family. Almost every evening we gathered together in the living room, watching movies, playing games, talking about our day. Those quiet nights were some of my favourite memories. I was 16 years old, almost 17, still in high school, but already thinking about the future. Christmas was only a few days away. The house felt warm, comfortable, safe. One evening, our family decided to watch A Christmas Carol. It had become one of our holiday traditions. Halfway through the movie, someone knocked on the front door. At first, none of us thought anything of it. Visitors weren't unusual. My mom stood up, walked to the door and opened it. No one was there. She stepped outside, looking up and down the street. Everything was quiet. The road was empty. Our garden wrapped around the side of the house, so she checked there too. Still, nothing. She shrugged, closed the door, and we continued watching the movie. A few days later, it happened again. This time, I was sitting at the dining table, working on assignments for school. Another knock. I walked to the front door, opened it, and once again, no one. Not a single person. We laughed it off. Probably neighborhood kids, playing tricks. Where I grew up, there was a game children sometimes played. They'd knock on someone's door, then run away before anyone answered. It was childish but harmless. At least, that's what we believed. Over the next several days, the knocking continued. Different family members experienced the same thing. Every time someone hurried to answer the door, there was no one outside, no footsteps, no laughter, no one running away, just silence. The moment that unsettled all of us happened to my dad. He usually stayed awake much later than everyone else, sometimes playing Xbox, sometimes watching television after the rest of us had gone to bed. One night, around 11:30, he heard a very gentle knock, not loud, barely audible. At that hour, there shouldn't have been anyone outside. He walked carefully to the front door, looked through the peephole and saw absolutely nothing. After waiting for a few moments, he slowly unlocked the door and looked outside. The street was completely empty. No movement, no voices, only darkness. He locked the door again, came upstairs and asked if anyone else had heard it. No one had. That was when the strange knocking stopped feeling like a harmless prank. Whoever was outside never laughed, never ran, never made a sound. They simply knocked, then disappeared. None of us knew it then, but Christmas night would change everything. Christmas Day finally arrived. Like every year, our house was filled with laughter. We opened presents together, shared gifts, watched movies, played games, and ate far more food than any of us should have. It had been a perfect Christmas. By late evening, I wasn't feeling very well. I'd eaten far too much, which always seemed to happen during the holidays. So I went upstairs to my bedroom, lay down, and eventually drifted off to sleep. Hours later, I suddenly woke up. The room was completely dark. I reached for my phone. The screen read 2:01 a.m. Everyone else had already gone to bed. The entire house was silent. I knew there was no chance I'd fall back asleep. Once I woke up, that was usually it, so I stayed in bed, scrolling through social media, watching Christmas videos and chatting with a few friends who were still awake. Everything felt peaceful. Until I heard it. A faint knock, so quiet, I wasn't even sure it was real. For a moment, I wondered if it had come from my bedroom door, or maybe my window, or maybe my imagination. I sat perfectly still, listening. My heartbeat grew louder with every passing second. No one should have been outside at 2 o'clock on Christmas morning. I tried convincing myself that the strange knocks from the past few weeks were just getting inside my head, but the longer I sat there, the less I believed it. Finally, I gathered enough courage to open my bedroom door. The hallway outside was completely dark. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps coming up the staircase. At first, I relaxed. I assumed it was my dad. He often stayed downstairs late at night before finally coming up to bed. I stepped into the hallway, ready to tell him I was still awake. Then I saw him. It wasn't my dad, it was a man I'd never seen before. For a split second, my entire body froze. He was already inside our house. He staggered as he climbed the stairs, barely keeping his balance. Even from several feet away, I could tell he was heavily intoxicated. My mind raced. Was this the person who had been knocking on our door all those nights? Without making a sound, I slowly backed into my bedroom. Carefully, I closed the door. I didn't dare lock it. I was afraid he might hear outside my room. I could hear him wandering through the hallway, one by one. Doors opened, then closed. He was checking every bedroom, every second. He was getting closer. I couldn't think, I couldn't move, I couldn't even breathe properly. Then I heard another door close. Very carefully, I cracked my bedroom door open just enough to see into the hallway. The man had just stepped out of my younger sister's room. That's when instinct finally took over. I sprinted across the hallway, straight into my parents' bedroom. I shook my mom awake. There's a man in the house. She sat upright immediately. My dad was still half asleep, trying to understand what was happening. Together, we hurried downstairs, and there he was. The stranger was lying across our couch. Several of my dad's beers had already been opened. Empty bottles were scattered around him, as if he belonged there. My mom shouted, telling him to get out. The man slowly opened his eyes. He looked around the room, completely confused. Then, he angrily insisted that this was his house. He refused to leave. No matter what we said, we tried pulling him off the couch, but he barely moved. His body was completely limp. At one point, my mom even slapped him, trying to snap him back to reality. He hardly reacted. Moments later, my dad came fully downstairs. The instant he saw the situation, everything changed. He stood over the man and shouted with enough force to shake the entire room. "This isn't your house. You need to leave." The stranger refused. Without another word, my dad grabbed him, lifted him off the couch and dragged him toward the side door. After forcing him outside, he slammed the door shut. For one brief moment, we all believed it. For a few seconds, none of us moved. We stood there, staring at the closed door, trying to catch our breath. Maybe it was finally over. Maybe he had gone. Then, without warning, the sound of shattering glass exploded through the house. The crash was so loud it made every one of us jump. Glass scattered across the living room floor. Before we could even react, a face suddenly appeared through the broken window. It was him. His hand, still covered in blood, rested on the shattered frame. Tiny pieces of glass clung to his skin. Blood slowly dripped onto the windowsill. Yet, he didn't seem to feel any pain. He leaned his face closer, forcing it through the broken opening. The image was something straight out of a horror movie. His eyes locked onto ours. His expression was twisted with anger. For a moment, it reminded me of the terrifying scene from The Shining. Only this wasn't a movie. This was happening inside our home. My mom instinctively stepped backward. I couldn't move. Fear had rooted me to the floor, but I'd immediately reached for the phone and called the police. While he spoke to the dispatcher, the man outside began screaming, "This is my house. You stole it from me. I know who you are. I know what all of you look like." Then his voice became even more threatening. "I'll be back. You'll see." Every word sent another wave of fear through the house. Eventually, he stumbled away into the darkness. None of us dared follow him. We simply waited, hoping the police would arrive before he returned. It felt like forever, but eventually, flashing blue lights filled the street. The officers took statements from every member of my family because I had seen him first. I ended up giving the longest statement. I described everything: the footsteps, the hallway, the bedrooms, the couch, the broken window, every terrifying second. After finishing their investigation, the officers left to search the surrounding area. Thankfully, it had snowed that night. Real snow, not the usual slush we often get. That fresh layer of snow became the biggest piece of evidence. There was a trail of blood leading away from our house. The officers followed it all the way down the street. It eventually led them to a nearby playground. There, they found the man. He was lying on the ground, still heavily intoxicated. Blood covered his hands. Tiny pieces of broken glass were embedded in his skin. The officers arrested him immediately. Later, they confirmed they were confident he was the same man who had broken into our home. The following morning, workers arrived to replace our shattered window. Only then did my younger brother and sister learn what had happened overnight. Remarkably, they had slept through almost everything, probably exhausted after an entire day of Christmas celebrations. As for me, sleep didn't come easily anymore. Because of my age and the threats he had made, I was later granted a restraining order against him. He was ordered to stay away from me and away from our home. For smashing the window, he was fined and sentenced to community service. Surprisingly, he never served any jail time. When detectives questioned him about the mysterious weeks of knocking before Christmas, he denied knowing anything about it. According to him, he had never knocked on our door before that night. He claimed he had simply become drunk while out with friends, wandered into the wrong neighborhood, and mistakenly believed our house was his old home. As unbelievable as it sounded, there was one detail that turned out to be true. Years before we moved in, he actually had lived there. Whether he genuinely confused the house or whether that was simply an excuse, I'll never know. But one mystery has never been solved. Those strange knocks that echoed through our home night after night for weeks before Christmas remain unexplained. Even now, years later, every once in a while, I'll hear a knock late at night. Sometimes it's probably just the house settling. Sometimes it's probably the wind. But every single time, for just a moment, I stop breathing because part of me still wonders if someone might be standing on the other side of the door, waiting. This happened around 2010 when I was about 6 years old. At the time, my family lived in a small neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. It was just my mom, my older brother, my older sister, and me. My dad was away, serving overseas. I was always very close to him, so whenever he was deployed, the house never quite felt the same. One rainy evening, my mom and I were sitting on the front porch. She was smoking a cigarette while we watched the rain quietly fall. It was cold but peaceful. Neither of us said much. We were simply enjoying the sound of the rain. Then we both noticed someone, a man, walking slowly down the middle of the street. He was wearing an oversized yellow raincoat. The bright yellow jacket stood out immediately against the dark, rainy night. There was something strange about him. No one else was outside. No cars, no neighbors, just him. Neither of us took our eyes off him as he slowly drifted closer to our driveway. My mom stood up. Without saying a word, she reached down and took my hand. The man stopped right beside our garbage cans. He didn't move. He simply stood there, looking toward us. My mom calmly turned, guiding me toward the front door. Just as we reached it, the man suddenly began yelling. I don't remember what he was saying. I only remember how frightening his voice sounded. My mom quickly pulled me inside, locked the door, and immediately turned off every light in the house. The moment the lights went out, I started crying. I was only 6 years old. I didn't understand what was happening. My mom hurried my brother, my sister, and me into my parents' bedroom. All four of us climbed onto the bed together. No one spoke. We simply listened, waiting, hoping he would leave. Eventually, the shouting stopped. The house became quiet again, little by little. We all drifted off to sleep. That night, I had one of the worst nightmares I've ever had. Even today, I can still remember it perfectly. In the dream, the man in the yellow raincoat was standing outside my bedroom window. He wasn't moving, he wasn't speaking, he was simply staring inside, watching me. I woke up crying. My whole body was shaking. I reached over and woke my sister. I told her. I was scared. She tried comforting me, then walked me into the bathroom, connected to my parents' bedroom. She closed the door behind us and quietly talked to me, trying not to wake anyone else. Then we heard it. A loud, violent banging echoed through the house. Someone was pounding on our front door. My sister's face instantly changed. She rushed out of the bathroom and began shaking my mom awake. Within seconds, my brother was awake too. I stayed frozen inside the bathroom doorway. Terrified, the pounding didn't stop. It only grew louder. Each strike felt like it shook the entire house. My mom motioned for all of us to stay inside the bathroom. Then she slowly walked toward the front of the house. She was looking for her old BlackBerry phone. She searched quickly, frantically, but she couldn't find it. That phone was the only way we could have called the police. We were completely alone. My dad, the person who always made us feel safe, was thousands of miles away. The man outside continued screaming, demanding that we let him inside. Every few seconds, another deafening bang slammed against the front door. We huddled together on the bathroom floor, crying, praying that one of our neighbors had heard the noise, praying someone would call for help, but no one came. My mom finally found the phone, wedged between the couch cushions, right where it had slipped earlier that evening. Her hands were trembling so badly that she nearly dropped it. She dialed 911. The dispatcher answered almost immediately. Trying to keep her voice steady, my mom whispered our address and explained that someone was trying to break into our home. The dispatcher told her officers were already being sent and asked her to stay on the line. Outside, the pounding suddenly stopped. The silence felt even worse. No one spoke, no one moved. It was impossible to tell whether the man had finally left or whether he was simply waiting. Then we heard footsteps. Not running, walking, slow, deliberate footsteps moving around the outside of the house, one side to the other, as if someone was checking every window, every door, every possible way inside. My little heart was pounding so hard. I thought he could hear it. Then there was a loud metallic rattle, the back gate. Someone was trying to open it. My brother slowly looked toward my mom. Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. We all knew he was now behind the house. A few moments later, another sound. The back doorknob, it turned once. Then again. Whoever was outside was trying every lock. The dispatcher suddenly spoke through the phone. Officers are almost there. Stay where you are. Do not leave the room. Those words were the only thing keeping us calm. Outside, the man began yelling again. His words were impossible to understand. He sounded angry, confused, almost desperate. Then something slammed against the back door once, twice, 3 times. Each impact echoed through the entire house. I buried my face against my mom's shoulder. I was convinced he was about to get in. Then, far off in the distance, we heard it. Sirens, very faint at first, growing louder with every passing second. The yelling outside stopped immediately. The footsteps became faster. Then they disappeared. By the time the first patrol car arrived, the man was gone. Officers searched the neighborhood using flashlights, looking through nearby yards, parks, and empty streets. They never found him. One officer came inside to make sure we were all safe. He examined the front door. There were fresh dents near the handle. The frame had small cracks where someone had been kicking it. Around the back, officers found muddy footprints leading away from the fence. The man had been there. He hadn't imagined it. Neither had we. The officer looked at my mom and quietly said if he had gotten through that back door. He paused, glancing toward us children. This could have ended very differently. Those words stayed with my family for years. We never learned who the man was. No one in the neighborhood recognized the description. No arrests were ever made. For weeks afterward, my mom refused to let any of us play outside alone. She installed brighter lights around the house. She double-checked every lock every single night. Even something as simple as hearing someone knock unexpectedly made all of us freeze. I grew older. Eventually, we moved away. But I never forgot the man in the oversized yellow raincoat. Whenever I see someone wearing a bright yellow rain jacket on a rainy night, my mind instantly goes back to that porch, to the shouting, to the pounding on the door, and to the feeling that someone was trying to get inside. Some childhood memories slowly fade away. That one never did. A few years later, my family rarely talked about that night. It had become one of those memories that quietly settled into the background of our lives. But every now and then, something would bring it back. A loud knock after dark, a stranger lingering too long outside the house, or the sound of heavy rain falling against the windows. Whenever those things happened, my mom would instinctively check every lock, every window, every door, even if she had already checked them just minutes before. One evening, long after we'd moved, I finally asked her if she had ever found out who the man in the yellow raincoat was. She looked at me for a long moment before quietly shaking her head. No. And maybe that's for the best. I thought she meant the police had simply run out of leads. But then she told me something I had never heard before. The morning after it happened, one of our neighbors came over to speak with her. He said he had looked outside after hearing the shouting from his upstairs window. He could clearly see our front yard. He saw my mom pull me inside. He saw the man standing near the porch. But then he noticed something strange. The man wasn't alone. According to him, someone else was standing farther down the street, almost hidden by the trees, watching. He couldn't make out whether it was a man or a woman. The figure never moved, never spoke. It simply stood there until the police sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Then, both figures disappeared. My mom never told us. She didn't want to frighten us any more than we already were. I asked the obvious question, did the police know? She nodded. They searched for 2 people, but they only ever found evidence of 1. That answer has always stayed with me, because it raises a terrifying possibility. What if the man who pounded on our door was never acting alone? What if someone else was waiting nearby, making sure no one escaped unnoticed? To this day, I still don't know. Maybe my neighbor was mistaken. Maybe the darkness played tricks on his eyes. Or maybe there really was someone else standing silently at the end of our street, watching our house, watching our family, waiting to see what would happen next. Sometimes, the most frightening part of a memory isn't what you know, it's what you'll never know. Eventually, the pounding stopped. The screaming faded into the distance, and somehow the rest of the night passed in complete silence. No police ever arrived. No neighbor came outside. It was as if no one else had heard a thing. That was the part my mom never understood. We lived in a small neighborhood. The houses were close together. Our home was part of a duplex. Someone should have heard the shouting, the banging, the man demanding to be let inside. But no one ever mentioned it. The following morning, life slowly returned to normal. At least that's what we tried to believe. For the next few weeks, nothing unusual happened. No strangers, no pounding on the door. Little by little, our fear began to fade. Then, one morning, everything changed again. My mom was the first one awake. As she walked toward the living room, she immediately froze. The front door was standing wide open. Cold morning air drifted into the house. At first, she thought someone in the family had forgotten to lock it, but then she noticed something else. One of the windows had been forced open. The screen covering it had a large hole cut neatly through the middle. Someone had broken into our home. My mom immediately called the police. This time, they came. Officers searched every room while we waited outside. It didn't take long to realize we had been robbed. Small items had disappeared from around the house. My piggy bank filled with birthday money and holiday savings was gone. But that wasn't what frightened my mom the most. There had been a large decorative vase filled with cash and loose coins that my parents had been saving for months. It was missing. The terrifying part was where it had been. On my nightstand, only a few feet from where I had been sleeping. Someone had stood beside my bed while I slept. Someone had reached over, taken the vase, and quietly walked away without waking any of us. Even now, that thought still sends chills down my spine. The police dusted for fingerprints, took photographs and searched the area, but they never found the person responsible. No arrests, no suspects, nothing. Years have passed, and I've often wondered whether the man in the oversized yellow raincoat was the same person who broke into our house. Part of me doesn't think so. The man outside had seemed furious, aggressive, almost desperate to get inside. The burglary felt different. Whoever entered our home moved quietly, carefully, like someone who didn't want anyone to wake up. But then again, maybe they were the same person. Maybe, after failing to force their way inside, they simply waited until another opportunity appeared. I'll probably never know. There is one detail I've never forgotten. Not long after the burglary, I noticed something strange. A neighbor who lived alone had a large decorative vase sitting on his front porch. It looked almost identical to the one that had disappeared from my bedroom. Was it ours? I honestly can't say. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I was only a child. My memories aren't perfect. What I do know is that my mom never stopped checking the locks before going to bed. Every single night, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. And whenever rain started falling, I'd find myself looking out the window, half expecting to see a man standing silently in an oversized yellow raincoat. This happened almost 3 years ago while I was serving a full-time mission in Idaho. My companion, who I'll call Spencer, and I had been assigned to a very small town. There wasn't much to do there. Most days the streets were quiet, the neighborhoods almost empty. At the time, I was also going through a difficult period in my life. I struggled with self-esteem. I wasn't sleeping well. Some nights I barely slept at all. That made the long days feel even longer. Unlike most missionaries, we weren't living in an apartment. Instead, we stayed in a tiny house. It sat alone on its own lot. Right next door was our landlord's home. If anything ever went wrong, we could simply walk over or give him a call. The house itself was small. As soon as you stepped through the front door, you entered the main room, where our desks were. Immediately to the right was our bedroom. Straight ahead, an open doorway led into the kitchen. To the right of the kitchen was the bathroom. To the left, the laundry room. And that was it. Just a tiny little house, surrounded by darkness every night. One evening, after the sun had gone down, Spencer and I had already returned home. We were relaxing before bed. I sat at my desk, scrolling through my phone. My chair faced the kitchen. Spencer was in the bedroom doing the same thing. The entire house was completely quiet. Then, I heard it, a single, sharp knock. It came from the kitchen window, the one directly above the sink. I looked up immediately. Beyond the glass, there was only darkness. I stared for several seconds, trying to see if someone was standing there. Nothing. I convinced myself it must have been a tree branch. There were several large trees behind the house, but almost immediately, that explanation stopped making sense. The trees weren't close enough to touch the house. And besides, that sound hadn't been a scrape, it had been a knock. Before I could think any further, another knock echoed through the house. This time from the laundry room window. My stomach tightened. Someone was outside, moving around the house. I started to call out to Spencer. Before I could finish my sentence, another knock came from the living room window, only a few feet away from me. I jumped out of my chair and ran straight into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I locked it immediately. Spencer looked up. His face had already turned pale. I heard it too. Neither of us knew what to do. The only things we had that could even remotely be used for self-defense were a couple of kitchen knives. We had no idea how many people might be outside, or whether they were armed. Going outside wasn't an option. While we whispered, trying to decide what to do, the knocking moved again. This time, this to the front door. Someone was slowly circling the house, testing every side, every window, every entrance. Then everything became quiet. The silence lasted only a minute or two, but it felt much longer, because deep down, I already knew where the next knock was going to come from. The next knock came from the back door, not loud, not frantic, just 3 slow, deliberate knocks, almost as if whoever was outside already knew we were hiding inside the bedroom. Neither of us spoke. We simply stared at the bedroom door, listening, waiting, hoping the person outside would eventually leave. Instead, we heard footsteps, slow, careful footsteps crossing the wooden porch, then another knock. This time directly outside our bedroom window. The sound was so close, it made both of us jump. Someone had walked all the way around the house. They knew exactly where we were. Spencer quietly reached for his phone. His hands were shaking as he whispered, "I'm calling the landlord." He answered almost immediately. Spencer explained that someone was outside, walking around the house, knocking on every window. There was a brief silence. Then our landlord said something that made both of us feel slightly relieved. I'm grabbing my flashlight. I'll be there in less than a minute. We waited. Every second felt painfully slow. Outside, everything had gone quiet again. No footsteps, no knocking, nothing. Then, a bright beam of light swept across our bedroom window. Our landlord, we heard him calling out, "Hello? Who's out there?" No answer. He slowly walked around the entire house, shining his flashlight between the trees, behind the shed, under the porch, and around every corner. After several minutes, he knocked on our front door. This time, it really was him. We carefully unlocked the bedroom and met him inside. He looked genuinely confused. I didn't see anyone. We searched outside together. The yard wasn't very large. There were no places where someone could easily hide. The grass was damp. The ground was soft. If someone had been walking around the house, there should have been footprints. There weren't any, not a single one. Our landlord eventually shrugged. He suggested that maybe someone had been playing a prank and had run off before he arrived. It sounded reasonable. At least, that's what we wanted to believe. The next morning, we mentioned the incident to another missionary companionship serving in a nearby area. They listened carefully before exchanging uneasy looks. One of them finally spoke. "You guys heard knocking too." Spencer and I looked at each other. "What do you mean?" "Two?" He explained that about a month earlier, while staying alone, he had experienced almost the exact same thing. Knocks moving from one window to another, then to the front door, always after dark, always when no one else was around. They had searched outside, found nothing. No people, no footprints, no explanation. For the rest of my mission, I never forgot that conversation. Fortunately, the knocking never happened again. But every night before turning off the lights, I found myself looking out each window just one more time, just to make sure no one was standing there, waiting for the next knock. For the remainder of my mission, nothing like that ever happened again. No more knocking, no strange footsteps, no unexplained sounds circling the house. Life slowly returned to normal, at least on the surface. But every evening, without even realizing it, Spencer and I developed new habits. Before going to bed, we checked every window, every door, every lock. Not because we expected someone to be there, but because neither of us wanted to experience that night again. Months later, my mission came to an end. I returned home, and eventually life moved on. Years have passed since then. I've lived in different places, different houses, different cities, yet every now and then, usually late at night, I'll hear a sound outside a window, a branch moving in the wind, a pebble striking the glass, or a simple knock from somewhere outside. And for just a moment, I'm back inside that little house in Idaho, frozen, listening, waiting for the next knock. I've told this story to several people over the years. Most believe someone was simply trying to scare us. Others think it was probably teenagers playing some kind of prank. Maybe they're right, maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation, but there's one detail I still can't explain. If someone had really walked around that tiny house, knocking on every window, every door, there should have been footprints. The ground was damp, soft enough to leave clear impressions. Our landlord searched with a flashlight. We searched ourselves. The next morning, we looked again in the daylight. There was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs that anyone had ever been there. Only the memory of those knocks, moving slowly, from one side of the house to the other. Sometimes the scariest experiences aren't frightening because of what you see. They're frightening because you never discover what was really there, or whether anything was there at all. To this day, I still don't know who or what was knocking outside that tiny house. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever want to know, because some mysteries are far more terrifying when they remain unsolved. The end.